Elvis was visiting patients at the Memphis Care Center on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when he heard a voice from room 12 singing "Love Me Tender" with perfect clarity. But when he walked into the room, what he discovered would shake him to his core and change the future of music therapy forever. It was November 8th, 1976, and Elvis had been making these unannounced visits to nursing homes around Memphis for months. Most people never knew about these trips. No cameras, no publicity, just a man trying to bring a little joy to forgotten lives in the final chapters of their stories. As Elvis approached room 12, he could hear that voice again, fragile but melodic, singing his song with an emotion that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unreachable. When he gently knocked and entered, he saw a small woman with silver hair sitting by the window, her eyes staring out at something only she could see. She was singing to herself, completely unaware that anyone was listening. The woman's name was Rose Abernathy, though she hadn't answered to that name in over 2 years. At 78, Rose was in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's disease, lost in a world where faces had no names, where yesterday and 20 years ago blended into the same gray confusion. Her granddaughter Linda sat beside her as she did every Tuesday afternoon, holding her grandmother's hand and fighting back tears. "She doesn't recognize me anymore," Linda whispered to Elvis as he stood in the doorway. "She doesn't know who I am, doesn't remember my name, doesn't remember my mother, her own daughter. The doctors say her long-term memory is almost completely gone." Linda's voice broke slightly. "But somehow she still remembers every word to your songs, every melody, every verse, perfect." Rose had been a music teacher for 43 years before the disease began stealing her memories one by one. She taught piano lessons in her home, directed the church choir, and filled her house with the sound of music and laughter. Her students remembered her as the teacher who could make anyone sing, who believed every voice had beauty if you just helped it find the right key. For 4 decades, Rose's home had been a sanctuary of music in their Memphis neighborhood. Every afternoon after school, children would climb the steps to her front porch, where she'd greet them with a smile. Her living room piano had heard thousands of scales and countless tears of frustration that turned into tears of joy. Rose had a special gift for reaching the children others had given up on. Students who stuttered found their voices through singing. Shy children discovered confidence at her piano bench. Mrs. Rose always said music wasn't about being perfect, Linda remembered. She used to tell her students, "The piano doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It only cares if you speak to it with your heart." The Alzheimer's had taken almost everything from Rose with cruel precision. First, she'd forgotten recent events, where she'd put her keys, what she'd eaten for breakfast. Then the disease reached deeper, erasing decades of memories. She couldn't remember her husband's funeral 5 years earlier, couldn't recall her daughter's wedding, couldn't identify photos of family vacations. But when an Elvis song came on the radio, something magical happened. The confusion would clear from her eyes, her voice would find its strength, and for 3 or 4 minutes, Rose Abernathy would come back to the world. "It started about 6 months ago," Linda continued, watching her grandmother sing. "The nursing home staff noticed that she would become calm whenever your music played. Not just quiet, actually present, like herself again." Linda wiped her eyes with a tissue. "It's the only time I get to see my real grandmother anymore. When she's singing your songs, I can see the woman who taught me to play piano, who sang lullabies when I was scared." Linda had been caring for her grandmother for 3 years, before the nursing home became necessary. She'd watched the brilliant woman who'd raised her slowly disappear behind a wall of confusion and fear. The grandmother who'd once corrected Linda's piano posture with gentle hands now looked at her with the frightened eyes of a stranger. "The hardest part was when she stopped recognizing my voice," Linda whispered. "I'd call her on the phone, and she'd hang up because she didn't know who I was. I'd visit, and she'd ask the nurses to make that strange woman leave. 3 months ago, she looked right through me and asked if I was there to hurt her. My own grandmother was afraid of me." The family had tried everything: photo albums to trigger memories, familiar objects from her home, recordings of her old piano students playing pieces she'd taught them. Nothing worked. Rose would flip through family pictures like they were images of strangers. But then one day, I was visiting during lunch and the radio started playing "Can't Help Falling In." Love. Suddenly, my grandmother, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in weeks, began singing every single word. Perfect pitch, perfect timing, like she was 20 years old again. Dr. Patterson said he'd never seen anything like it, Linda explained to Elvis. He called it islands of memory, places in her brain that the disease hadn't reached yet. Your music lives on those islands. Elvis stood there watching Rose, his heart breaking with every note she sang. He'd seen the power of music many times in his career, but this was different. This wasn't entertainment or performance. This was survival. This was a human soul using melody as a lifeline to hold on to the last pieces of herself that the disease hadn't stolen. "Mrs. Rose," Elvis said gently, sitting down across from her, "that's a beautiful song you're singing." Rose stopped mid-verse and looked at him with eyes that seemed to focus for the first time since he'd entered the room. For a moment, her expression was blank, confused. Then something shifted, a spark of recognition, not of who he was, but of something familiar and comforting. "Do you know that song?" Rose asked, her voice suddenly clearer than it had been in months. "Yes, ma'am," Elvis replied softly. "I do know that song. Would you like to sing it with me?" What happened next left Linda speechless. As Elvis began singing "Love Me Tender" in his famous voice, Rose not only joined in but began singing harmony, complex, beautiful harmony that she somehow remembered despite forgetting how to tie her shoes. Her voice grew stronger, more confident, and for those precious moments, the confused old woman disappeared and the music teacher emerged. "How is this possible?" Linda whispered to the nurse who had quietly entered the room. "She can't remember my name, but she can harmonize with Elvis Presley?" The nurse, who had been working with Alzheimer's patients for 15 years, shook her head in wonder. "Music memory is stored differently in the brain," she explained quietly. "Sometimes it's the last thing the disease touches, but I've never seen anything like this." Elvis had heard about this phenomenon from other nursing home visits, but seeing it firsthand was different. As he watched Rose transform from a confused woman into a confident musical partner, he began to understand something profound about the power of what he'd spent his life doing. "Music isn't just sound, young man," Rose said with surprising clarity. "It's a time machine. When I sing these songs, I can remember pieces of myself that I thought were gone forever." When the song ended, Rose looked directly at Elvis with the clearest expression anyone had seen from her in months. "You sing that song beautifully, young man," she said. "Have you had training?" Elvis smiled gently. "A little bit, ma'am. My mama used to sing with me when I was young. Music was always important in our house." "Music is medicine," Rose said, and for a moment, Linda saw a flash of the teacher her grandmother had been. When people hurt, music can heal what medicine can't touch. When people are lost, music can help them find their way home. Over the next hour, something extraordinary happened. Elvis sang song after song with Rose, not just his songs, but old hymns, folk songs, standards that she had taught to students decades earlier. With each song, Rose became more present, more herself. She told Elvis about her students, her church choir, her late husband who used to listen to her practice. The memories flowed like water, finding a crack in a dam. "You know what, Mrs. Rose," Elvis said after they'd sung Amazing Grace together, "I think you might be the best singing partner I've ever had." Rose smiled, the first genuine smile Linda had seen in over a year. "Music is a gift from God," Rose said. "When we share it, we're sharing a piece of our souls. That's why it never really leaves us, even when everything else does." Elvis made a decision that would change everything. "Mrs. Rose, would it be all right if I came back next week to sing with you again?" "I'd like that very much," Rose said. Then, looking at Linda with sudden recognition, she added, "And maybe my granddaughter can join us. She has a lovely voice, too." Linda burst into tears. Her grandmother had remembered her, had called her by relationship if not by name. It was the first time in 6 months that Rose had shown any sign of recognizing her. Elvis kept his promise. Every Tuesday for the next 8 months until his death, he would quietly visit Rose at the Memphis Care Center. No media, no publicity, just two people sharing music and memories. During these sessions, Rose would emerge from the fog of her disease, telling stories about her life, recognizing Linda, and sometimes even remembering things that had happened the week before. The transformation was remarkable. On non-Elvis Tuesdays, Rose would spend most of her time staring out the window, unresponsive to staff and family. But on Elvis days, she would wake up asking what time her singing partner was coming. She'd request that Linda bring her good dress and try to fix her hair, patting it into place with hands that usually trembled with confusion. It was like watching my grandmother come back to life once a week, Linda later recalled. She'd spend the whole morning preparing for Elvis's visit, humming his songs. For those few hours each Tuesday, the disease would retreat, and I'd have my real grandmother back. But Elvis didn't stop with Rose. He began visiting other Alzheimer's patients throughout Memphis. At Riverside Manor, he met Harold, a former jazz musician who could no longer speak, but could still play complex piano pieces from memory. At Sunset Gardens, he discovered Catherine, who had forgotten her children's names, but could sing every hymn in the Methodist hymn book. Each visit taught Elvis something new about the mysterious relationship between music and memory. He began bringing other musicians with him, creating what he called memory concerts, small, intimate sessions where music was used to reach people that medicine couldn't help. Dr. Samuel Morrison, a neurologist at Baptist Memorial Hospital, began documenting these sessions. What Elvis was doing intuitively was activating neural pathways that conventional therapy couldn't reach. He was proving that music isn't just entertainment, it's a form of medicine. He funded research into music therapy and worked with doctors to understand how melody could unlock memories that seemed lost forever. Word of Elvis's work spread through the medical community. Neurologists began studying the connection between music and memory with new urgency. Dr. Oliver Sacks visited Memphis to observe Elvis's sessions firsthand. What I witnessed challenged everything we thought we knew about memory and the power of music to heal, he later wrote. Nursing homes across the South started incorporating music therapy into their care programs. The University of Memphis launched the first formal study of what researchers began calling musical memory preservation. Medical journals published papers on the Elvis protocol, the systematic use of personally meaningful songs to stimulate cognitive function in dementia patients. The protocol was surprisingly simple but remarkably effective. Caregivers would work with families to identify songs that held special significance for each patient: wedding dances, childhood lullabies, songs from significant life periods. These musical memory triggers were then used during daily care routines and moments of confusion. Within 2 years of Elvis's death, over 200 nursing facilities across America had implemented some form of the Elvis protocol. Music therapy programs expanded from experimental treatments to standard care practices. Schools began offering degrees in music therapy, and insurance companies started covering musical interventions for dementia patients. Linda Abernathy became a vocal advocate for music therapy research, speaking at medical conferences and fundraising events. "Elvis gave me back my grandmother," she would tell audiences. "He showed us that love and music together can build bridges across even the deepest valleys of memory loss." The research led to groundbreaking discoveries about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways even in the presence of disease. Scientists learned that musical memories weren't just preserved differently. They actually seemed to protect surrounding brain tissue from damage. Rose passed away in May 1978, almost a year after Elvis. At her funeral, Linda played a recording of her grandmother and Elvis singing together. Through her tears, she told the congregation, "My grandmother taught me that music was medicine. Elvis Presley showed me that kindness is medicine too. Together, they gave me back the last months I had with the woman who raised me." Today, music therapy is a standard treatment for Alzheimer's patients around the world. The Elvis protocol, using familiar songs from a patient's youth to stimulate memory and awareness, is taught in medical schools and nursing programs. It all started because one Tuesday afternoon, a famous singer heard an elderly woman singing his song and decided to sit down and sing with her. The Memphis Care Center still has a plaque in what used to be Room 12, in memory of Rose Abernathy and Elvis Presley, who proved that music is the language the heart never forgets. Every year on November 8th, the anniversary of their first duet, the nursing home holds a memory concert for current residents, using the power of song to bring people back to themselves. Linda, now a grandmother herself, continues her advocacy work and often speaks about that transformative afternoon when Elvis entered their lives. "People ask me what it was like to meet Elvis Presley," she says, "but they're asking the wrong question. The real question is, What was it like to watch someone use their fame and talent to heal a broken heart and a broken mind? Music therapy programs now exist in thousands of care facilities worldwide. Rose's story has been featured in documentaries, medical textbooks, and research papers. But perhaps most importantly, it's been whispered between families facing the cruel reality of Alzheimer's, a story of hope that proves love can find a way to reach across even the deepest darkness. Every time a caregiver puts on headphones for a confused patient, every time a family sings together in a hospital room, Rose and Elvis are there. Their Tuesday afternoon duets continue to echo through countless lives, proving that sometimes the most important performances happen far from any stage. The story of Elvis and Rose reminds us that sometimes the most profound healing happens not on stages or in stadiums, but in quiet rooms where two people share a song. It shows us that fame and talent are never more beautiful than when they're used to comfort someone who feels forgotten. And it proves that music truly is medicine, capable of reaching places that pills and procedures cannot touch, bringing light to the darkness of diseases that steal everything except the melodies of our hearts. Rose Abernathy may have forgotten her own name, but she never forgot how to sing. And because of her duets with Elvis Presley, millions of families have learned that love and music together can build bridges across even the deepest valleys of memory loss. Sometimes the most important concerts are the ones nobody ever hears about, played for an audience of one in a small room where healing happens one song at a time.